Thought I'd start this video with an anecdote. Rolex really shot themselves in the foot when they discontinued the 39mm white dial Oyster Perpetual. And I remember this moment so well because I received countless comments, emails, messages from all of you out there who were keen to go after one. Whether or not your name was on the list or you were eyeing one on the grey market, the brand not only culling this size and this watch dial was significant. And I still believe that to this day it was one of their biggest mistakes. And this thought has been percolating recently that white dials offered from brands that we appreciate so much and not as common as you would think. And I want to understand why. It's no secret that the most common color used and chosen for many of the most prominent watches and brands that we enjoy is black. I don't understand it. Personally, I don't understand why it is, but they have become the staple diet. You've got to admit that it's pretty surprising. I mean, why? Why black dials? Considering that historically white was chosen as the prominent color on all of the faces and dials of clocks, watches, for centuries. So why is it that today white dials make up such a small percentage of the models that we like most? I guess it's important to point out that dress watches and sports watches, there is a divide. I think dress watches still have quite a predominant use of this color because they're holding on to this traditionalism, this historically accurate color. But in the sports watch realm, I still believe it's something like an 80 to 20% split. Isn't it interesting that when we do see a watch that began with a black dial, now given a white dial, not only is the interest in it increased greatly, but there is also quite a bit of rarity to it. It just baffles me that the polar opposite color is just not venerated or celebrated as much anymore. That maybe watch brands have seen that the interest in white dials is down, or that sales numbers are low, or they have just found over time that black dials are a lot more versatile. But I think all of this, again, it stems from the 1950s and the direct impact it had on the industry. Along with the many technological advancements and the new areas these watches were exploring, the introduction of sports watches into the mainstream and the use of different materials especially, all of these small things, they factored into the lessening popularity of this color. And before getting into the many reasons why you should own a white dial, let's cover a little bit of conjecture and history and the reasons why I believe that the white dial lessened in popularity over time. 1950s was the turning point, but let's wind the clocks back to the turn of the 20th century from 1900 until 1940. Over those 40 years, white dials were still so incredibly prominent as they were the centuries before. Porcelain dials, enamel paint, black contrasting letters, Arabic numerals. Why was this the color of choice? We could say tradition and keeping ties with all of that, but legibility has always been the number one reason, right? You want to be able to see the time in any light. History and practicality and experience taught these watchmakers that the ability of being able to see black numbers on a white background was far easier, no matter the light. It's also important to mention that the hands on these watches back in the day, they were either blackened or heat blued. This was not for the sake of beauty so much as for the sake of function. Too many of us know that polished hands on a watch kind of ruins its legibility. And we can see that from, let's say, the 1700s all the way up until the 1940s, that even for a military context, pilots were issued white-dialed watches with black numerals. So what is it then that threw the spanner into the works? Why is it that the interest suddenly moved to black dials? And I think it was the introduction, the wide use, and the decision to implement luminova on watch dials instead. Radioactive isotopes like radium and tritium, they set the ball in motion. No longer did you need a dial to be the primary source of reflecting light. You now have materials that are active and glow all throughout the day. You can see the practicality of this and the novelty of using these materials at that time especially. And I'd even venture further down this rabbit hole and say that I think many brands were kind of against using white dials in this context because it was traditional and that was the past. They wanted to communicate instead that, hey, black dials with luminova, this is the way forward, this is the future. Of course, there were rare exceptions to this rule, like for example, if you are operating a nuclear submarine, you don't want any kind of radioactive isotopes on your watch, so they decided to go against it. This is the Ministry of Defense. But we can see that over half a century later, black dials, they're very much the norm. Now, whether or not we have just come to accept this over time, that it's been drilled into us so much that it's just the way it is, or whether there is more substance behind the versatility of a black dial remains to be seen. So that's why I believe that in the professional sports watch sense, why the white dial has never been as popular as the black dial. It's all to do with legibility, versatility, and a far better material to help telling the time in the dark. But here's the thing, after that long-winded introduction, history lection, and conjecture, there are plenty of reasons why it's worth going after a white dial. And here are a few that I've just listed, that black dials, they're just far too common. We know this, we see this everywhere. With a new release, it's almost a mistake to not deliver a watch with a black dial. We do see how some launches, they lose their pull and their popularity for this reason alone. The black dial watch is so synonymous today that not seeing it seems like a mistake. But I do think in those rare moments when a brand does deliver on a white dial, like the Speedmaster of the other year, they do end up looking cleaner, neater, clinical. In these moments, you can see how light casts a shadow on these dials, which you do not see with a black dial very often. And seeing this light play at work, it gives the watch a different flavor. It's very much an act of using negative space in a different way, where we see very often that the text on the dial fades into the background, and the core elements like the indices and the hands, they're a lot more dominant. I would also say that in quite a few contexts, the use of a white dial is a lot more formal looking. I guess that's why we see it so often used in dress watches, not so much in sports watches. This is going back to the traditional ties that the white dial has always had. I guess it's something that's also ingrained in our brains, that white dial does say historic and old-fashioned. And back then we used to dress better, so there is a touch of nostalgia. This is an important one for those of us out there with larger wrists, is that white visually wears bigger on the wrist. Just like with clothing, black being slimming, white makes you look a lot wider. Again, to do with light play, that so much more of this watch is on display. And I guess there is an argument to be made that through the 20s, 30s, 40s, when these watches were 33 millimeters, and that was the style of the time, they all looked visually larger on the wrist because of this choice of white. So not only on a legibility front was it more practical, but on the wrist, looking bigger, it looked more masculine. Now this one is a give or take, open to interpretation, but it is a versatile color. Maybe not in all situations, but in certain conditions like in the snow, yeah, this color works well. And then we return back to legibility. Nowadays we see white dials offered with luminova, and it can be a hit or miss. But when you do see white dials with black surrounds, blackened hands, black plots, it does make for a very interesting wearing experience. And especially in the chronograph space, we see white dials used so much. And very often what the white dial allows is for the attention to be focused on the chronograph features, the black surround sub-registers. The time, instead, is in the background. And I would say that some of the best chronograph designs in the world use white dials for this reason. And here's the thing to tie it all together, to return to the beginning of the video, that it is actually unique. Just think about Tudor watches, think about the Black Bay. How many millions of them have black dials? But the one that stands out to you the most? Probably the Opaline dial GMT or the Pro. What about when you think Omega? What are the two watches that jump to mind? In my case, Seamaster 300 Great White and the white dial Speedmaster. What about Rolex? The obvious answer is the Explorer 2, but actually the Oyster Perpetual 39 is one that's always in my head. You think of the giants in this industry like Patek Philippe with the Nautilus. You think of the 5711. How often do you see the white dial? Personally, I think it's the best looking Nautilus they've ever made. What about Hamilton with their field watches? What about IWC and the Mark 20 with a white dial? Zinn watches, and one of my favorites of this past year, the U50 with that negative dial. There are countless examples where the white dial is used so well. And in a world that is awash of black dials, these with all of their individual styles and tastes, they are all unique. And I believe as a result, they make for a more special wearing experience. Don't get me wrong, the use of white on a watch dial is still a popular choice, but it is still underrated. Underrated in a sense that the brand may not see the potential of this color. But when they do deliver a great one, it's not forgotten. In fact, it's etched into our heads, far more so than the next generic black dial piece. Where once upon a time, this color on a watch dial was as common as bath water, and was likely phased out and made less prominent for the sake of legibility, too many holds and ties with traditionalism. The use of it today on a watch that we like so much, it's rare and it's a novelty, more often than not demanding a premium in price. And you've got to say, it makes you think how history so often repeats itself and the results, they're arguably the same. So when you think white dial watch, which one speaks to you? Dress watches, sports watches? Give me that name of one that stands out to you the most. And thank you for taking the time to watch this video. See you in the next one.